We've looked at quite a few unofficial ports in our time, yet we're nowhere close to having exhausted all our options. So today, I have yet another one for you. It goes by the name Donkey Kong 5, or more accurately, Donkey Kong 5, The Journey of Over Time and Space? It's not known for certain when it was released, but most people seem to think it was somewhere around 2001 to 2002 by the rather notorious handheld developer Syntax Technology Company Limited, often referred to simply as Syntax. Syntax is known to have released over 100 games on the Game Boy Color alone, making them perhaps the most prolific pirate developer on the console. They've released titles based off a number of popular franchises, including Pokemon, Golden Sun, Spider-Man, and of course Donkey Kong, to name a few. Still, much of their work remains elusive as only a small portion of the games have been dumped, and newer titles developed for the Game Boy Advance are still being discovered today. Without going too much into detail at the moment, it suffices to say they are something of a paragon in the world of pirate games, especially in regards to handhelds. And this game in particular is one of their more well-known titles. The instant the Syntax logo leaves the screen, the game is already trying everything it can to utterly confound you. The opening story unfolds on screen, featuring the best Chinese to English translation that an 80s era Google Translate would have on offer. To summarize, though I would recommend reading the story in its entirety, it goes that Sodoma, a spirit in charge of the world's plant life, is abducted by something called the Lunbado, its goal being to, quote, arrest the growth of the life. With her gone, the banana tree dies, leaving Donkey Kong with nothing to eat, the resulting weight loss inexplicably transforming him into a monkey with a hat. So Donkey Kong decides to leave the forest and go on a journey, presumably over time and space, to stop the Lunbado and save Sodoma, or something like that anyway. Putting aside any concerning biological inaccuracies, though, my immediate thought is that Syntax is probably just one letter away from going supernova on the massiveness of the irony alone. Not to mention that this game is also part of their English Treasures series. Copyright Syntax, all rights reserved. Anyway, as great as I find this, it really is secondary to the gameplay, so let's jump into that then. Since the start of this review, I've been deliberately holding off revealing what this game is a port of. Syntax was, to say the very least, bold. DK5 is in fact a built-from-the-ground-up port of the original Super Mario Bros., and slightly unbelievably, it doesn't do all that bad a job. Super Mario Bros. Is probably about as close to perfect as any game can hope to be. It's the gold standard for platformers. And that's something that Donkey Kong 5 does exceptionally well, is give us a glimpse into the alternate universe where Super Mario Bros. Wasn't the game that saved the gaming industry, but instead just another decent NES title, which would perhaps go on mostly forgotten. First of all though, what does this game get right? Well, for starters, and perhaps most obviously, the level design is great. The masterfully crafted Miyamoto/Tezuka levels are still as excellent and well thought out as ever. That is up to World 5 where the game prematurely ends. That means there's no warp zones to World 6 through 8 obviously, but other than that, everything including the other warp zones remains intact. Another thing which isn't actually all that bad for once is the controls, impressively enough. One point in particular I have to give these guys at Syntax, or BBD as the title screen implies, is the air controls. The range of motion you have in the air, and more importantly, the ease at which you can reverse jumps before a commitment, is near perfection. General movement and running also feels pretty good for the most part. There is a pretty major exception, but I'll come back to that slightly later. The final things that I think really deserve praise here are the graphics and sound/music. That's really more a compliment for the people who originally created these assets than it is for Syntax, though. The music, as far as I can tell, is taken exclusively from Pokemon Pinball, which isn't at all uncommon for pirate Game Boy Color games. Other Syntax games, such as the classic titles Star Wars Episode 2 Battle Among Cloned Humans and Spider-Man 3 movie version, have used it as well, and interestingly enough, it always kind of works somehow. I just have to say, well done Nintendo, truly an impressive feat in genericness. Some of the visuals, in particular the main character's sprites, are ripped from Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color, so they unsurprisingly look pretty professional. But much of the rest of the graphics, enemies, objects, and backgrounds also look pretty good, not to mention fairly varied. The backgrounds especially create a unique atmosphere around these all too familiar levels. The enemy designs are notably weird though. They aren't poorly designed or drawn, but perhaps a bit incongruent. In particular, the main antagonist Lunbado's Dracula-inspired design seems really out of place. And that pretty much sums up the standout positive elements, so now let's see what doesn't work. The first point of interest here is the jumping. And I said earlier that the air control is pretty great, but jumping itself can be difficult or even at times impossible. specifically when near ledges or while slowing down after running. The latter definitely ends up being the bigger problem, as it's not always clear when your momentum has completely run out, and to add to that, the zoomed-in nature of the screen makes planning these already difficult jumps even harder. Another control oddity, which is actually hard to classify as a glitch or special extra syntax gameplay feature, is Donkey Kong's hovering ability. After collecting a mushroom, or in the case of this game, a piece of meat, clearly the most obvious choice of food, tapping the B button repeatedly while in the air causes Donkey Kong to flail his arms and hover a bit. This ends up being a really good strategy to get maximum height at the end of the level. Taken alone, it's not really a negative, just an oddity, but the floating goes away when Donkey Kong gets the Hadouken power-up that replaces the Fire Flower in this game. So it ends up encouraging you not to take advantage of the power-ups it provides, a problem I'd say it shares with Nintendo's very own Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. The real problem in the controls that I alluded to earlier is another element that only shows up after grabbing a power-up. For whatever reason, holding the run button turns you into a literal Tasmanian devil with all the maneuverability of a 50-ton boulder. Chances are, if you try to play a little fast and loose, as many Mario veterans tend to, you'll either run headlong into an enemy or off a cliff. It's even worse because, as I said earlier, you can't jump while slowing down. Plus, on top of all that, the hit detection can be spotty or sometimes downright cheap. If you can unlearn some of those basic Mario instincts you might have, though, you will likely find a rather enjoyable, albeit slightly slower take on the classic, which isn't all bad considering the game truncates the final 3 worlds anyway. In addition to some dubious hit detection, some of the attributes of certain enemies have been changed to make you slightly more likely to get hit. The top hat wearing centipede, for example, which replaces the piranha plant, works more like the red variety which was introduced in the Lost Levels, coming out of the pipe regardless of the player's position relative to the pipe. Perhaps more drastic are the changes to how shells and bullet bills work. In the case of the former, they can no longer be hit from the side, instead dealing damage, and with the latter, you can no longer kill them at all. Extra bits. You can get trapped at the exit of the level 2-1. The screen scrolling sometimes allows you to backtrack where you normally wouldn't be able to backtrack. Entering a pipe at certain angles can lead to odd glitches. Lombardo can be killed with one Blue Con Hadouken. Watermills can be seen in the background of the final level. The overworld map mimics that of Super Mario Deluxe, even featuring a level checklist. The continue screen is terrifying in every way. So taking everything together, where are we left with Donkey Kong 5? Though there is quite a bit that this game could have done much better, it is actually one of the better controlling and certainly one of the better looking pirate games out there. The translation is, well, poetic in its terribleness, and its impact is something that likely won't be leaving me, ever. The game is extremely charming, so much so that its faults end up being sort of endearing. Also, the game has one particular quality that is pretty hard to find anywhere in gaming, and that's that it actually gets better on subsequent playthroughs. The playthrough I did for this review was actually my second, and it was pretty amazing how everything started to fall into place. Perhaps best of all, this game does not require save states in any capacity, since it features infinite continues, making it good for a gaming purist as well. I would definitely recommend it for the pirate game or Nintendo enthusiast. The original release, like many Syntax games, is pretty hard to find, but there are reproduction carts available for those interested. Also, rumor has it, a German version exists out there somewhere, so some gamers abroad can also enjoy this truly unforgettable tale. And the tree blasted slowly.